I'd like to call the meeting of the Village of Campton Hills to order for April 2nd, 2024. It is 7 o'clock p.m. Roll call, please.
Trustee Boatner?
Here.
Trustee Burson?
Here.
Trustee McElvey is absent. Trustee Millette? Present. Trustee Morgan?
Here.
Trustee Muncy?
Here.
President Warnicki?
Present. Mike, Trustee Millette will lead us in the pledge. Everybody rise, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If everybody would remain standing, a moment of silence for a deputy from the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department was killed, and we'd like to take a moment of silence, please. Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, we'll move on to public comments. Tracy?
Mike Terrell?
It's lit. Thank you. Thank you, and good evening, everyone. It's been, Mike Terrell for the record. It's been nearly a year of understanding and learning. Hopefully all have become comfortable in their new positions. In 2022, a renewal of the intergovernmental agreement, IGA, with Campton Township Highway was completed. This mutual agreement covered road maintenance only, R&B. Major road repaving projects were reserved entirely and exclusively for the Village of Campton Hills under that IGA. The township maintenance program was to be paid for from county road and bridge revenues and paid to the village. Changes in the IGA called for the Campton Highway to provide details on where the village money was spent prior to the village board approving their warrants. You all have a packet there. Please note about 4 or 5 pages in is exhibits B and C. They are included in the IGA here. They show the agreed upon eligible expenses between the village and the highway. In September of this past year, I became aware of a township highway invoice for July. It's attached, and it would be the first flagged tab that you have. For reference, the shaded lines on the invoices are those items which have been identified by the Highway Department as not inclusive to the IGA. All others were invoiced to the village at 75% per the IGA. Please reference page 3, that first tab, of the July expenses. You will note a $400,000 line item as part of that invoice from the township highway. Please note the description that goes with that $400,000, and I quote, "Transfer from Schwab to BMO. A transfer of funds by the Highway Department from their investment account to their banking account was being invoiced to the village." Former administrator Burchard caught the error, and it did not make the warrants. Now look at the dots highlighted on all of the invoices. Compare those. You don't have to do them all right now. Compare those to exhibits B and C. Those line items are not included in the mutual agreement. Bank fees, Social Security and health insurance benefits, etc., are nowhere to be found in B and C. Health benefits. If you notice, you've got at the end of the invoices, it'll say health benefits, etc. There is no distinction for health benefits for staff not included in the IGA and highway workers. Look earlier on in the IGA and you'll see the village is billed at $60 an hour. That's a loaded $64. So all of those health and benefits, etc., should not be invoiced. Similarly, look at the invoices for May, June, and October, which are included. Review the dotted items in the right column and compare those to the IGA exhibits for all of those months. Please take a look at the October expenditures invoice dated 12/21/23. That's the second tab. Note the $207,302 invoice. It reads, and I quote, J.A. Johnson Paving Company, Contract Road Services -TWP Township. Remember, all paving projects are reserved exclusively for the village. Presumably, this is a township road project paid for by the village. Yes, that invoice was paid in the warrants. Not including the $400,000 for the 4 months provided in the invoices here, there is greater than $383,000 that was paid on ineligible IGA road and bridge invoices to the Campton Township Highway. That is $383,000 in 4 of the 10 months since May. You may also recall that a few months ago, one of the trustees called into question a few large fuel invoices. In follow-up, you were told that these invoices were miscoded by the Highway Department. They were not fuel. This is not the best in accounting. You may be told by the Campton Highway Department that they pick up the tab when the village runs dry on road and bridge. When ineligible invoices are presented and erroneously paid, it is not hard to do. That is, run out of money. You may ask yourself, how is it that the village runs out of road and bridge in 6 months and Campton Highway can pick up our slack and complete all of their projects within their fiscal year? Just look at the invoices. As in the course of sound financial transactions, it is incumbent upon the Highway Department to review and submit only invoices consistent with the mutually agreed upon IGA. As was done by Burchard, it is equally incumbent upon the village staff to review the accuracy of the invoices received and consistent with the IGA. Again, these represent 4 out of the months since May. To wrap up, I might suggest that a full review of Campton Highway invoicing from May of '23 be audited, and that going forward, copies of the submitted road and bridge invoices be included in the monthly warrant documents presented to the board for payment. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Okay, are there any questions or comments about the presentation? Okay,
John Tetzlaff?
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Tetzlaff. I've spoken to you previously about the Burning Tree water issue. I'd like to share with you tonight 3 activities that we as concerned citizens, homeowners in the affected area, have taken upon ourselves to execute in the last several weeks. The first is a contract with G&L Septic for a one-time removal of 1,250 gallons of water for a fee of $340. The affected homeowners will pay that. The second contract was with Active Excavating out of Elburn for a $3,000 contract, and this needs more detail because it's a bit more complex issue. They have a specialized piece of equipment called a jet blaster, which has the capability to cleanse, purge, remove debris from the interior of piping, whether it be above ground or below ground. Allegedly, it can remove tree roots, animal nesting, accumulated garbage, dead animals themselves, in addition to miscellaneous dirt, silt, and other material that I can't think of at the moment. The third issue we activated was a do-it-yourselfer, and we rented a high-volume pump, 450 feet of hose, and the 3 homeowners most directly impacted by this standing water pumped both ditches dry in a matter of about 2 hours. The cost for this is around $240, which will also be absorbed by the impacted homeowners. If I could continue just a little bit further, I'll give you a description of how these events developed and the result of those efforts. The GNL septic operation went smooth in conjunction with 1,300 gallons that Active Excavating extracted to their tank truck. That's 2,550 gallons of water pumped out on the morning of March 11th. This had negligible impact on the standing water situation. There was, however, no scientific measuring devices employed, be it a metered stake or some type of laser system. So that result I just relayed to you is eyeball analysis only. Active then employed their jet blaster from the south end of the problem pipe area. This would be on the north side of Long Shadow Lane. They proceeded about 120 feet, thereabouts, ran into some impenetrable object, which is not clearly understood what it was, but they had to cease operations at that point, and they moved their system, the jet blaster, to the east end of what is now considered the discharge end of the pipe, and proceeded about 110 feet, now going west, and impacted another problem area. That jet blaster was withdrawn, and they employed their camera system. They could not employ the camera system on the beginning end of Long Shadow Lane because the camera system does not work in murky water. The camera system revealed an amazingly clean pipe, but a possible incorrect installation whenever this system was installed. Pipe has a flange end, smooth end. If you want water to flow that way, the smooth end flows into the flange end. This pipe appeared to be installed for water to go in the opposite direction. I personally saw the footage because the camera truck belonging to Active Engineering is a separate unit, and representatives from the Dillon family, the Sweet family, and the Tetzloff family got in the back of this box-type truck and reviewed the video footage. That essentially concluded phase or activity number 2 with Active Engineering. And on March 29th, the 3 affected families, most immediately by this problem, rented a high-capacity pump, 450 feet of hosing, and pumped out both ditches into the manhole on the east end of the situation, the east end of the discharge pipe system, and it worked well. Here we are 3 days later after a heavy rainfall, and the ditch is again near capacity, about to overflow. So where does that leave us? Essentially back to square one. We have received one quote for a digging operation, excavating, new piping for about $25,000. We have another one quote from a different independent concern that we hope will arrive this week. I will get both those quotes to you as they become available. But once again, we are looking for all options, all suggestions, any possible solutions. All comments are welcome, and if anybody has any questions, I'll attempt to answer them to the best of my ability.
Okay, thank you. We do have that item on the agenda under 8D, the discussion items, so please stay, and we'll be talking about Long Shadow and the stormwater. Okay?
Thank you.
Charles Griffey?
How's everybody doing tonight? I just got a quick question or a comment. Maybe you guys can help out. Maybe the highway department can help out. But going down Brown Road where the bike path is, it's got so much brush that's overgrown so close to the road that you almost have to near stop at the bike path in order to prevent from running somebody over, because you can't see. And it wouldn't really take that. I would volunteer to go down there and cut it down and haul it away if nobody would be mad, but I don't want to get down there and get myself in trouble. But I hate to see some kids or something get run over at that bike path because we can't see on the road, because then you got cars parked all on the side where they use the bike path. And it makes it very difficult. I'm just very concerned someone's gonna get hurt there real bad. So if somebody could take a look at it, I'd appreciate it.
Okay,
Which side of the road was that on?
That would be on the west side, would be the cluttered area.
yeah, thank you. Actually, I live on Brown Road, and that would be the Kane County Forest Preserve, and I will give them a call.
Usually Kane County Forest Preserve, once you come into Campton Hills, they tell you, you bought it now, it's yours, it's not ours no more.
Oh, no, that actually does, yeah, it's theirs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
it'd be great, I mean, if somebody can
Okay.
communicate with them.
Okay, yeah.
Thomas Bayoun?
I'd like to take I got some answers. I'd like to take a pass on my
Oh.
comments today.
Okay, Tom, thank you.
And no more.
All right. Okay, moving on, I'll entertain a motion to move the consent agenda, or is there anything to pull off the consent agenda today? No? Then I'll motion to pass the consent agenda.
So moved, Muncy.
Moved by Muncy, second.
Second.
Second by Janet. All right, roll call.
Trustee Muncy?
Aye.
Trustee Burson?
Aye.
Trustee Boatner?
Aye.
Trustee Millet?
Aye.
Trustee Morgan?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes, thank you. On to staff reports, our police report will be first. Chief Levand.
Thank you. Thanks for the moment of silence. This is the only thing I have to report to you guys tonight. So Deputy Christina Mulsel, the DeKalb County Sheriff, tragically lost her life Thursday night when she was parked in her patrol car on the side of Route 23. A commercial truck veered off the roadway, striking the back of her vehicle. She was transported to the hospital where she was later pronounced dead. It's a tough time right now for DeKalb County Sheriff and a lot of the area agencies, so thoughts and prayers are with Deputy Musel, her family, and the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office. She was a single mother of 3, so she leaves behind 3 young kids. Her mother is actually a retired New York PD commander. After the tragedy, assistance was requested from surrounding law enforcement agencies. So on Friday, when I got the request, I was coming back from staff and command school, and I put out a request to our officers to assist both the DeKalb County Sheriff and Sycamore PD. The response was great, so I want to take a moment to thank Officer Munoz, Officer Ramirez, Officer Kulchek, Officer DiMaggio, and Deputy Chief Blinko. So since the tragedies happened, we provided watch of the family residence in Sycamore for 24 hours. Saturday, we participated in the transfer procession that took place yesterday. Officer Ramirez today and tomorrow is doing the overwatch at the funeral home in Sycamore. And then tomorrow, we'll also, when she has her services on Thursday, someone will take part in that at Northern Illinois University. So there is also a GoFundMe account that is set up for her children. So it is a big tragedy, obviously, when she's a single mother and she leaves behind 3 young children. But I just wanted to thank our staff for stepping up and helping Sycamore and DeKalb County Sheriff. And then thank you for having a moment of silence at the beginning. So that's all.
All right, any comments or questions for Chief Levand? Okay, we'll move on to Treasurer Timothy McPhillips.
I do not have a monthly report for this meeting. The 11th month actual report will be presented on the 16th, but I will be speaking later in the agenda about the budget.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move on to action items. Motion to approve Resolution R 24-04, a resolution authorizing the execution of an agreement for roadway design engineering services with HR Green Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $200,000.
Also move.
Okay.
I'll second.
By trustee Millet, second by trustee Morgan, and we have Scott that'll talk about this.
You have the information in the packet here. This was an item that was discussed at the previous board meeting, and we requested to submit this to improve the village's position towards federal funding for these roadways. So here to answer any questions. Oh, I just want to mention, I think there were cleaner exhibits at your seats. I'm not sure what happened to the copies that showed up in the agenda. It's the
Okay.
same, it was the same package, just printed cleaner. So just here to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Scott. Any questions or comments for Scott? Nick, go ahead.
Scott, I just want to clarify, so the engineering that we're doing, I read through and all the detail that you put in there, I mean, it's a full, it's really like shovel-ready, as you described it. I mean, so this is all of the engineering that you would do to do road reconstruction if we were ready to pay for the roads and we're doing, I mean, these documents, they're ready to go.
That is correct.
We're submitting these documents, though, prior to having funding for these roads. The idea is that this gives us a stronger position and increases our odds of getting this funding.
That is correct. The county program annually, or every 2 years when they come up with the program, selects projects that receive funding and other projects that are eligible for funding. Those go on the contingency list. Annually, as projects progress, some projects are on schedule, other projects from other communities may fall behind. There's still an obligation to spend funds down. So projects like this can help fill in the gap where other funds are available because the project may not have met its schedule, or if additional funds are made available, you're in the best position to capitalize by having a project. Or there's actually three separate roadways here, 1, 2, or 3 of those ready to go.
But just to clarify, there's still no guarantee. I mean, we're spending this money. I mean, you can't say, if you're going from 50% odds to 90% odds. At the end of the day, we spend this money, and there's no guarantee that we're getting funding for these roads.
That is correct. And in response to that, should that happen and you not receive funding in the next call for projects, because you have the engineering completed, you would rank much better in that regards. So you either have the early advantage of trying to get the funding for next year, or in the future call, be in a much, much better position to get the direct allocation.
So it's almost like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, just real quick. So it's almost like potentially we're funding next year's engineering, potentially. Or we could look at this as if the funding doesn't get approved and we take this $200,000 or $191,000, really we would, I mean, budget-wise, the way I would do it, I would allocate that as the cost for engineering for the road work that we are getting done for the year. So, I mean, if we were paying, you know, $80,000 a mile for road work, we would divide this up and add it in. So really, potentially, our engineering costs are just gonna go up for the year. We're taking a lot of risk in doing this with, I mean, $200,000 is a lot for our village, and there's a lot of risk that we're taking by spending this $191,000.
It is a risk-reward decision that you do have to address. The fact is, if you do not do this, these roads are not eligible for funding until at least 2030. The current call for projects funds roads in 28 and 29, and this is an opportunity to jump forward. If you do not do this, you will not get funding until 4, 5, 6 years in the future. That's just the facts of how the program is so far out because there's so many obligations from other communities. It's a risk reward that you do have to consider.
I do have more questions, but somebody else can.
Okay, trustee Millet, I think he was next, yeah.
For edification, I don't know if that's the right word. For perspective, I'm looking at the agenda I've got for the next meeting. Since I'm chairman, they send me the agenda ahead of time. And,
Yeah, I think you should, everybody doesn't understand what you're chairman of.
well, it's the committee that reviews how the money gets spent. It doesn't mean I control it, it's just I run the meetings. We are looking at, there's always a list, like we were talking about before, there's always a list of warranted projects, and those are the big ones. Those are the Galena Boulevards and the Kirk Roads and that kind of stuff. And then there's a separate set, since it was determined a long time ago, we didn't want all the money being sucked up by all the big towns, which is how it would have worked out. There was a set aside for maintenance type project, resurfacing or heavy resurfacing projects. And I'm trying to bring up the list, and the attachments aren't opening. And there are somewhere on the order of 40 projects that are in the you will get some funding over the next 4 years list, and that varies from time to time. And then there's these 20 or 30 that are the contingencies, which we are on. One of our projects ranked pretty high, so we're just barely off of the Campton Hills, I think, one of them. We're just barely off the list, and then the other two are like in the mix with everybody else. So to the point that you were asking, Trustee Boatner, is we'll be looking at our spend down policy, which is something we're required to do for when those big projects tend to hit more snags than these little projects can, because you get environmental concerns, you get property acquisition concerns, all that type of stuff. So since I've been in my position here in Kane, and then I was a similar position for my 20-odd years in DuPage, it happens all the time that they're looking for projects to fill out that money. So if you don't spend it, it goes either back to Springfield, or it actually gets rescinded by DC and it goes to another state. So there's an incentive to get it spent. So to your point, yes, this puts us in line for either of those things happening where there's, okay, Aurora didn't make the letting, there's $2 million unallocated, we gotta spend it, that's one option, or when the time comes for next call in 2 years, okay, we are ready, our engineering's done, so that when they evaluate it, my committee evaluates it, and the county staff that supports it gives us the numbers, you will rank higher. So like the one that just missed the cut, the 5 points that we could have got if it was ready, it would have made the cut. So it's a calculated risk.
Trustee Burson?
Well, if I
Oh,
could just
you wanna-
insert, in my experience in both
Okay.
Lake County and Cook County, that's the similar experience. We would spend the engineering phase 1 and 2, so we could qualify on the call for projects, or the example that Trustee Millette used, when a project that's got a big dollar amount has some type of delay, they still have to spend that money in that fiscal year for that county, and they look at projects that are phase 1, phase 2 engineered, and in the project list, and they move up. Instead of waiting a year or 4 years, they move up. That's, I think, what Scott was trying to say, and that's been my experience as well. So it's a calculated risk. There's no guarantee. But it generally, with this amount of money in the project call list, you got one of them will probably for sure hit the Campton Hills Road. The other two, I couldn't put a percentage on it.
Trustee Burson?
I think just, first of all, just to clarify, when we were mentioning Campton Hills Road, I think we're talking about Town Hall Road, between Campton Hills Road and 64. So I want to clarify a couple of things. One, in reference to Trustee Boatner's comments, and he and I talked about this before the meeting, and we're in agreement on a lot of things. I'm not sure that I quite agree about the risk component of this, particularly because the 2 points kind of interact. My understanding is these roads, these 3 roads that we're talking about, these are roads that were kind of next in line no matter how you look at it. They were roads that we had looked at in prior years and didn't get to, right? Roads that we don't have funding for now, they only continue to get worse. And so my assumption is that one way or another, in this next 3, 4, 5 years that we're talking about, these roads are going to get paved. They might get paved with this outside money. They might get paved through our own efforts, but they're going to get paved, it seems to me. And so the engineering is going to need to get done. And So trusting that this is a fair price for the engineering, which is a different question, but assume that it is, then I don't have a problem necessarily with paying for the engineering now rather than paying for it later. It also seems to me that if I understand this program correctly, if even one of these roads is selected for this program, that is free money for us, right? I mean, that's completely free money for that section of road. So it is a gamble as to whether we're gonna get the free money. But even if we don't get the free money, all we've really done is pay for engineering that we kinda need to do anyways in order to take care of those roads in the next couple of years. Does that sound right?
With one exception, the engineering is for a full depth
That
reclamation.
was my next question.
So,
actually.
but it's 75% paid for by this program and 25 for the village, so it does more than,
All right, that
instead
was,
of getting an 8 to 10-year solution, you'll get a 20 to 23
well, I'm glad you
year.
brought that up, because that was what I thought I saw in between the lines, is that this is full depth recovery for this entire project, which we talked a lot about with HR Green, about the advisability and perhaps necessity of that in lots of different areas where there is no, short-term hope of funding. So, that seems like a good thing.
Okay, trustee Muncy, I think he's got.
Thank you, President Winnicke. I just want to remind the board, this has been in the works since 2020, 2021. We've been trying this. This existing board, on August 31st of 2023, approved $7,500 per roadway for this grant application for these. We've gone, it's probably a better way to say it, down the road, but we've continued on this project, and as I think it has been pointed out, what we would get for this would be engineering that we're going to do anyway. What we're going to get for this, potentially, if we are able to be awarded these projects through the Kendall Council Mayors, would be a full depth reclamation, the best possible roadway, and our 25% plus our, percent of the engineering is still going to be about the estimate was about the same or less than we would pay if we just did the lightest amount of maybe a 2-inch mill and overlay and limited engineering. So the end product will be the absolute best we can get for our village. So that's why we're striving for this. But if for some reason it all fell apart and the program went away, we still have the engineering, we still have the ability to do the work that we know we need to do anyway. So at this point, I also see the cost of the engineering is in line with what we've seen in the past. I did research that for Campton Hills Road and others. It's a little over the estimate we were given in 2022, but I think prices probably have changed a little in the past couple of years. So, I would say that I think there's a real justification for moving forward with this.
Okay, trustee Millette, you want to go next?
Thank
And then
you.
Scott, we'll get back to you.
To correct, my Campton Hills Road is on the list. Town Hall Road, by the draft scoring, we are, so projects that made the cutoff, there's projects that had that got 26 points on our rating scale that made it. And then for other reasons, it's not straight points, but R2, so Town Hall Road North has 43 points, and then Brown Road has 42.8, or it's 43.3 for Town Hall, 42.8 for Brown. So those two are like right on the cusp. Denker's a little more challenging because the cost is higher on Denker. So Denker's down in the 35s. So that's probably, if we're handicapping it, you're gonna parlay on those two and then put Denker as the long shot. And to your point, Trustee Muncy, is the same thing. I would strongly urge Mr. Marquardt to thank him for rounding his estimate to his nice round number of 200,000, but I think they can probably beat their own estimate of 200,000. Once they get into the project, they realize what they're doing. So I would fully expect that maybe they only beat it by $1,000, but I'm sure you can beat it.
Understood. If I could answer
Go ahead,
a
Scott.
few of the questions. I don't know if I'm going to get them in order. Actually, what's in the packet, the $200,000 was the original. The final number from the proposal is $191,000 and change. So we've already beat that by 8,000. We also have this set up that each project gets its own
Each roadway gets its own project report and design set of plans. If we get funding for one, it's ready to go. If we get funding for two, if we get funding for two or more, there is some opportunity to consolidate design engineering plans and some efficiency in that regards. So the phase ones are all standalone, because you have to treat each one as a separate project, because that's how they're ranked. So, on the point score, part of the reason Danker scored lower is actually it did not, because it's not partially jurisdiction of the highway district. The other two roadways, Brown Road and Town Hall Road, are joint jurisdiction of the roadways, so there's additional credit for that. So, yes, and we see this, as Trustee Millette and Administrator Rooney have mentioned, we see this in other counties. We see it with some other communities within Kane County too that do this and advance the funding and are able to take advantage of this when the larger multi-million-dollar projects get delayed. These $500,000, $1 million type projects are great to fit in and fill in for that.
Okay, are we ready? Another question? Sure, go ahead, Trustee Boatner.
Thank you. So it's still $200,000, and we don't need to spend the $200,000 to qualify for this funding. It's increasing our chances. So we're not, there's never a discussion of let's pre-purchase engineering for the next couple of years, so that's never really an objective to do that. It's nice to know that we will have them if we don't get the funding, that there's still an asset sitting there, that it's not a total loss. But at the end of the day, this year, we could spend $200,000 on road maintenance and rejuvenation. How many miles of rejuvenation could we guarantee for $200,000? I mean, we're still in the running for the funding. I just feel like dollars are too precious to be putting them out there for road engineering if we're not, guaranteed to get those that money.
I want to clarify what I think is your impression, maybe how I said it earlier. These three roadways are in the contingency program. Without doing the engineering, you will not advance to being funded during this time period, because any other community can do the same thing. And if it comes down to one that, well, we'd like to do it if we get the money, or someone that has a shovel-ready project, the shovel-ready project gets selected. So no, you do not have a guarantee of funding within, this program goes through 28, 29 currently, correct, Mike? Yes. During that time frame, without doing the advanced engineering.
All right. Any more discussion? Any more? Go ahead.
Just to
Trustee
reinforce
Muncy.
that point, for the $191,000, we can't do 1 mile of 2-inch mill and overlay. We can't even do one.
That's right.
This is looking at almost 3.5 miles of full-depth reclamation. And as, obviously, as Mr. Marquardt said, it's clear that in order to get chosen, you have to be one of the projects that is ready to go. And so therefore, I continue to recommend this.
Okay, Trustee Millette, go ahead.
I'm not diminishing or making light of what you said. You're right. We could actually spend $200,000 now, or $150,000 now, and extend what we're planning on doing. That's my whole life in a way. I mean, that's always been the constraint I've had everywhere when I've talked on, from that podium to other people too, is we could certainly do nothing except for go straight on maintenance. We can. And we can go straight on putting things in, and there's a huge there's a enormous validity to that point. It's just it's a decision at this point, risk reward type of thing, and it's a bit of a cutthroat at this point too. Because on, you know, on the list here, just for perspective's sake, if that helps further, there are, let's see, 20, 40, 60, there are 60 projects that were proposed totally, and there are 30, about 40 that are based on the rating system or even else. So there's 20 out because something didn't work. They you know, they either didn't do their math correctly, or so for some reason the 20 weren't warranted to be eligible for the program. So we're competing with 6 projects from Sugar Grove, 2 projects from Aurora, Couch Road being one of them, Deal Road being the other. 4 projects from Aurora, 1 from Montgomery, 2 from Elgin, 1 from St. Charles, and let's see, another chunk from Aurora. So, and then East Dundee, West Dundee both. So, are we willing to roll? Not necessarily roll the dice. Again, I mean, it's more like it's more like a, you know, it's not straight luck. But yeah, we are making a decision that we're going to expend this now, and it would be unavailable. When we were looking at, and when we talked to the budget, I mean, we still have a decent balance sitting that we have available. So we're not, you know, we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul right now. But yeah, we could certainly, instead of allocating that to this, we could allocate it to more like a minor or something like that too. So I'm obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but seemingly obviously in favor of getting in line and getting ahead of some of these other folks. Because that's, I think, one of the reasons that I stood in front of a bunch of people the past 17 years and said, this is a good reason to be a village, because that gets us in line to do this, unless we were a township where we had a partner with somebody like a village to do that. Because the way the program runs is you have to be the county or the village to apply, step 1, and then you can have a township or another village, or you can partner with the county also. So getting these heavy traffic roads, right, that more than just the people who live on them use, again, that's the principle behind this federal aid urban system funding, so that, you know, yeah, you live on a busy road, that's annoying, but, you know, it'll be done with, you know, 75% of federal funds. Could we have done it cheaper than the total by just doing our type of resurfacing? Absolutely, we could. But then again, that's the design life. So when we leave this to whoever replaces us, you know, these are roads that had a full depth treatment to them, so we are not going to be as concerned about them becoming what they are or worse 20, 30, 40 years from now. You know, the drainage issues will be addressed, the base will be addressed, the soft spots, if you use the vernacular, the peat, the unsuitable soils will be removed and replaced with rock. So that's the stuff we wouldn't be able to do if on our program where we're doing, you know, where we're guesstimating or estimating them at 200, 300,000 a mile. That's not going to get that. So do we say just wait and see? No, because other towns will do it. If we don't do it, and other towns I know are having conversations right now, same thing, like, okay, they may be in a sidebar with one of the folks here that, you know, if you had a staff that was sitting here that was paid, they can do this for you. I mean, I've done this in the past for other towns where I've put in, you know, I've done phase 1 reports as a staff person. So that's another option. We just don't have that option right now. We don't have somebody that could sit there and do it, and I don't have the time, sorry. But I think we should. I think we should be able and be in a good conscience that this is the right way to expend these funds.
Okay, Trustee Morgan, you've been waiting.
The way I see it, $191,000 is not risk. It's an investment. We're going to spend that money anyway to engineer those roads. Why not end up with a better set of roadway when it's done? So I think that this is a really good investment to be able to get us farther up the list, to be able to maybe alleviate some of the costs that we would have because of the 75-25% way it's going to cost out. I think this is a huge investment. I think we should do it.
Okay. Any comments, Scott, or?
No, I think you've
Okay, covered everything?
asked the questions that you need to ask of each other.
Okay, any more comments or questions? So we're ready to vote? Okay, roll call.
Trustee Millet?
Aye.
Trustee Morgan?
Aye.
Trustee Boatner?
Aye.
Trustee Burson?
Aye.
Trustee McKelvey is absent.
Okay, motion passes.
And aye.
Thank
Trustee
you.
Muncy.
Trustee Muncy, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
did she forget you? Oh,
Thank you very much.
Had to wake everybody up. All right, moving on to discussion items. I don't know if you should sit down yet, Scott, but A is MFT bid award for street resurfacing project update. So I think that would be you.
Certainly, I should have looked ahead. Yes, we have, the project is advertised, the bids are scheduled to be open next Wednesday. We have currently received and distributed packets to 6 contractors, which is typically the maximum that you receive out in this area. So all the ones that we would typically expect have received plans. So the plan would be to open the bids next Wednesday, review them, put together the bid tab, put together the recommendation for award at the April 16th village board meeting in 2 weeks.
And the question I'll anticipate, Trustee Boatner, do you still estimate it to come in 800,000 or less? I mean, it's an engineer estimate.
It's an engineer's estimate. That's where we're at right now. We've seen things happening in recent weeks. That's still the number we're going with.
Okay, anything else? Any questions? No, discussion? All right, we'll move on. We'll move on to B,
Thank you.
fiscal year '25 budget review. Timothy McPhillips.
Good evening again. I've distributed to everyone a single-page summary of the budget that was presented to you last meeting. You might be asking, why am I distributing this one single page? Is because I neglected to include it in the report last meeting. I apologize. And it's kind of a critical page because it summarizes all the activity for each of the funds by revenue expenditures and the net revenue over expenditures. So looking at this document all the way to the right, column G, this summarizes the document you looked at last meeting, which says the village anticipates to bring in $4.5 million in revenue from the various funds. We plan on expending $3.9 million with a excess revenue of $621,298,000. I'm sorry, $621,298. There's some caveats to that. First of all, if you look 4 from the bottom, MFT funds, there's going to be a $479,000 excess revenue over expenditures. That is going to change. All of that dollars are going to be spent. So there will be $0 in MFT. So the net position of the village for the budget year will not be $621,000. It will be approximately $142,000. Does that make sense? Additionally, we're going to be moving the $257,000 in the capital fund for revenue. That is a transfer from the general fund. That is actually going to be transferred to the MFT fund. The net effect is 0, but in the document we're going to present on the 16th to vote on, that is what it's going to look like. Essentially, there's not much else to discuss here unless you have anything you'd like to add. But my goal is to incorporate these changes I just mentioned to you. With Tracy's help, with the village clerk's help, I will get the public notice posted, and we will hopefully approve this on the 16th. There was one other point I wanted to make, and I sent everyone an email this morning. Trustee Muncy brought up the fact that the police personnel did not have training split out, and that will be incorporated in the final budget. But just for your I guess, point of reference, that will be approximately $62,000, which is based on 12 hours of training every month for 12 officers. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them now. You can reach out to me before the 16th meeting, and I will get you the final draft within a week.
Okay,
And
trust,
If I could, just,
go ahead.
so you do the
Administrator.
math on the engineer estimate of 800,000, even with the 479 and that balance of capital that we didn't spend on tornado sirens, et cetera, getting transferred over, I still, depend on what the low qualified bidder is, I still might be asking you if you want to do all of said roads for an expenditure from the cash reserve to meet that number potentially. And I'll prepare it that way, but I'll spell it out that you would be making that once I get the number from HR Green.
Okay, trustee Burson?
That's actually specifically because we've got 479 from MFT against that 800,000, so you've got daylight in between there that you have to cover.
If we want to do all the roads that we asked in February.
Right. So since Treasurer McPhillips is here, I thought maybe we could clarify what I thought was maybe a larger issue about the police funding, or the police staffing expense, actually, that came up last time. Because whether training was broken out or not correctly was one issue, but seemed to me the larger dollar value item that we were trying to get our minds around was the increase in overtime that appeared to be budgeted versus the increase in full-time officers that Chief Levand was striving for. So it seemed like if we were able to staff up, as we were planning to and as we discussed in the police presentation, that the overtime would drop, at least in future budgetary terms, rather than go up. So maybe you could help us understand that better.
Are you referring to budget, previous budgets, or actuals?
I was referring to the number that was in the budget for next year relative to the prior budget and the actual. So if I recall correctly, it was $128,000 that was budgeted for overtime when we had been running at $45,000 between budget and actual.
Okay. I will do my best to answer that question.
Okay, sorry if I'm catching you, by surprise, but.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think you're better prepared to, even on the spot, to answer it than any of the rest of us were.
Sure. I should be the best one to answer it, I would hope. So the assumptions for creating the police personnel are based on the number of hours we're going to require, which I had presented to you. And any overtime that could not be covered by the full-time staff in those assumptions are going to be split between part-timers and full-timers, right down the middle, 50-50. Is that exactly how it's going to work? I can't state that. I can't state that. One difficulty you're going to have if you make comparisons to this budget or any other budget year to actuals is that actuals for this fiscal year it's like comparing an apple to an orange. There's been so many changes in the police budget this year, in the police actuals this year. We had a chief that we were not using out in the field that was still being paid, so that would inflate the numbers. We had 2 officers pay out PTO, MTO that was banked from other periods that are going to be reflected in the actuals. So it's going to be a difficult comparison to actuals. I don't know if that makes sense. And then, we believe, when I worked with the chief to generate this, is that by hiring these full-time employees, these 3 new ones baked, I don't want to say baked, that are included in this budget, that is going to reduce overtime substantially. And that is why overtime is going down.
Thank you.
I wish I could put actual numbers to those kind of more general narration I gave you.
And Tim, I've got the overtime history. It went from as low as $5,500 in 17 to 23. It was actually 44,000 and budgeted for 38,000 this year we're finishing because of some of those vacancies. So with a report that we've gotten from the Board of Fire and Police Commission, the chief can elaborate. They have started their interview process so that when we projected last week, when I talked with, as the chief and I, that we thought we'd get 3 hired May, June, and July. It may be even sooner if the Board of Fire and Police Commission finishes their due diligence to put a hiring list. We might have all 3 of them May 1st, or early in May, which will help. And the chief, if you could elaborate on that, what it does.
So that would be the goal, obviously, if we could get again, these are not the police department adding spots to our roster. This is the police department being down 3 personnel, so going all the way back to April of last year where the first one started. And then obviously we've had some turnover in personnel for different reasons, so that's put us at the 3. So we're not asking for additional officers. That puts us back at our full staff. Going to the full staff, there'll be a significant difference, obviously, in the overtime this year. Just like Treasurer McPhillips just said, I mean, personnel, people being paid, trying to cover shifts, it was pretty chaotic this past year. But ultimately, by us taking those 3 full-timers, would be for us to go to 12-hour shifts, and I know we discussed this before. That is another significant cost savings across the board. It doesn't matter if it's overtime, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, there is going to be a significant difference in it. So the Police and Fire Commission, they're actually finishing interviews this week. They'll be done. There obviously could be some more like background checks and that have to be completed. But the goal is, like, as soon as we can get those 3 in and we can switch and go to 12-hour shifts, even with what is there in the budget currently that you're looking at, I am confident, like, you will see a cost savings, like, across the board, because it's gonna make a big difference for us. And I have a plan in place for it. Not only do we have the 12-hour shifts, we discussed this with sort of a roving car that's going in there, so there is a plan in place, and it will drastically change the budget, including overtime, so confident of it.
One aspect, though, there could be some changes in the staffing, patrol officer versus a sergeant rank, though.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely,
I
and that's
wanna make
even
sure.
taking that into consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you still gotta have supervisors out there. I can't have just all patrol and no supervisors, so, and we obviously don't have supervisors that are really out there right now. I mean, we're fortunate here that we have officers with a lot of experience, so you still wanna have supervisors out on the shift. But even with that being said, if we're speaking of a sergeant, pay from where they're at now as patrol, I'm confident that the budget's gonna be significantly different than what you see here.
Okay, trustee Millet? Trustee Burson, you got?
So there are, on the budget assumptions that we're looking at right now, there's 4,578 hours of overtime that were forecast. You may not be looking at the same document. This is what document we got from Treasurer McPhillips. So this was a calculation that showed number of full-time officers, total number of hours, number of full-time officers working those hours, and then a total number of hours not covered by full-time officers. It was 4,578. And as Treasurer McPhillips was explaining earlier, he split those hours down the middle.
Correct.
And so the hours that were being worked by part-time officers, the cost of that is $68,670 because of an assumption that's a $30 hourly rate. And overtime for our full-time officers, obviously a higher rate. So we're looking at $128,447 for that. So the question I would like to try and get at is, do you think, stripping all the dollars away, do you think that the the assumption of remaining hours of 4,578, 2.25 people approximately, right? Full-time people, that's going to be significantly reduced by this additional full-time hiring?
Yeah, I do. I mean, like, I appreciate all the work, like Treasurer McPhillips has put Administrator Rooney to that, and we're going obviously off what the calculations are, 3 shifts, 2 cars per shift. So like, I understand why it's done this way, because this is how we have it now. But yeah, could I give you an exact number right now? Absolutely not. But yes, I believe it would be substantially lower than what we're looking at here by us taking the 3, filling those 3 spots, us going to 12-hour
12
shifts.
hours.
I mean, just the, the logic in it alone is being that, we're taking 3 shifts and we have 2 guys out or women out there at the same time. I mean, we're cutting that down by 2 officers in itself. Granted, we have what I said is a roving car that's out there, which is gonna be a part-time car, so it's cheaper rate to begin with too. Yes, I understand why it's like this, because this is what we have right now, and we haven't transitioned to a 12-hour shift. We've been waiting for police fire commission and that, but yes, I do believe if everything aligned correctly, and we have the 3 spots filled, which puts us at full staffing level, that we will be good and this would be reduced.
So it's refreshing. We might spend less money
I'm
than,
pretty confident
than
that
we're
you
planning
would,
to.
bar any emergencies or anything,
And
so.
I can speak from experience when other departments have switched from an 8 to a 10 or to a 12, it does save money in both raw terms and the overtime coverage. It has worked in the past. It should work here if history is repeated, and it should be.
And one more quick thing, not only would it save you money, but like, I want you to think, like, the morale, the health, the wellness, like, I can go on and on with this whole 12-hour shift thing. You're taking guys, or officers now that every other weekend, they're off 3 days. There's a lot of benefits that go into it, so yes, cost savings is great, but there's also a lot of other things that play into it too.
Okay, Trustee Millette?
I don't want to jump on any police. Everybody good with the police? Thanks for the explanation about the adjustment. I still have a little bit of confusion, and here's why. What is the adjustment to? My point. On the handout here, we got the adjustment of 163,380. Okay, well, if I add that to 1,989,403, that doesn't give me a negative 621. And if I add, if I add that to, 485,777, that doesn't get me to that number either. And I was looking in the proposal, say for village board and legislative. It makes sense. On line item 85, I'm looking at it right now, it says FY24 budget 1,000. Then it says our burn rate 85. Okay. F23 baseline 128, adjustment of 6. And then it goes out to 134. I can do that math. That part's easy. And the row above it, which is risk management contribution line 84. FY24 budget 2,000.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt you really quick?
Yeah.
I apologize. You're referring to the adjustment column, column F?
Yeah, column F.
And which particular line?
If you go on, say, line 85,
Okay,
all right, if you follow me, meeting supplies,
right.
okay, 1,000, 85, 128, 6 equals 134. 128 plus 6 equals 134, I get that.
Correct.
The line above it, risk management contribution, 2,000, okay, nothing, 2,100, 2,100. So I'm guessing 2,100 plus nothing is 2,100. That's making sense.
Okay.
When I look at the roll-up, I can't make those numbers work. That's what I'm confused about it. So,
Okay, so the adjustments, I mean, I could have left that blank on the summary. I
Okay.
just carried the formula all the way down.
okay.
Those adjustments were designed by the Finance Committee. And what we did, and I kind of included this in my email, is that was used to either increase the baseline by a certain percentage. Oftentimes it was 5%.
Yeah.
Other times it was just to clear out the baseline completely.
Okay, I'm not
Okay.
disagreeing. I'm following that. If we're gonna put it in a spreadsheet like this, me being a dorky engineer, there's some formula that makes the two match. And if one is superseding the other, that would be the same thing, it's like, okay, we're gonna use this number instead of the number. But if we're going off of the FY '24 budget, and then we're adjusting, that gets us to one place. But if we're going on the FY '23 baseline, that gets another adjustment, right? So if we could just get a way to tie those, especially on the bigger numbers, like the one I use is funny because it's $6, but that one, the math made sense to me on that one.
Right, I got you. Yeah, I really just focused on column G and copied it over. I probably should have just left on this summary the adjustment out, but I can tie that out for you.
All right. Any other comments or questions for Timothy?
Well, with your experience on the board too, for our public hearing on the 16th, is there anything else that you would suggest that Tim and I work on so we can not have somebody from the public challenge us on a number or something that you've seen in historically here? Because both of us have no history, except Michael O'Dwyer and some of the folks in finance.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, trustee Muncy.
Thanks. I think that trustee Burson hit one of the larger areas that I think people would ask about the overtime. In addition, we already talked about lack of training, the fact that things don't line up, the explanation of what the adjustment is in the new format, I think has been helpful, because it is a new format from what we had previously. It does look different. It's a little, hard to get used to, or at least for me. But now that we are, I think that is better. I don't see anything that is really gaping there. I guess at this point, I think we've addressed most of it, but I would go back and potentially ask the Finance Committee just to check one more time before the public hearing, just to make sure.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on.
Well, actually, we do have one part of the budget that I wanted to address, which was partly why Scott was also in attendance. Scott did do an example for us, because there was a question asked, I think 2 weeks ago, or maybe the first time we talked about the budget, about the lane miles. I'm sorry, folks, I didn't have it on. About the lane miles versus a per capita on what dollars come in on MFT. And I kind of knew it historically, but I had Scott do an example that I put on your dais that shows technically in the built-up areas, MFT per capita gets more money to the village than if it was lane miles in unincorporated township. So over the last 17 years, I can't, do a full sensitivity analysis, but the general concept would be you have gotten more dollars by being a village to fix the roads than if you would have stayed unincorporated as a township, because the lane mile calculation is done as a statewide issue, so that the townships downstate, south I-80 predominantly, don't have a formula that's per capita that would not get very many dollars for those rural areas of the state. And so this was like just doing an example, as I know somebody did bring that up, is are we better off having been a village than a straight township? And it would mathematically show that you are marginally better off as a MFT dollar versus township lane miles. And then the other aspect, we did ask HR Green to take the robotics report and match it apples to apples. And one of the takeaways you can see there in 2019, you had 10% approximately of red, and in 2024, it's doubled. And you did grow by about 4% from 9% to 13.8 in the green area of road, so you improved on your really good road status. But the takeaway is the statement I made at a couple meetings now, that even if you budget 800 and go to $1 million by either getting some enhancement revenues that we've discussed, or you take from your unrestricted cash balance of the $4 million that you have available, and over a few years, plussed up from 700 to 1 million, you're still gonna be about $1.5 million to $2 million in the hole because of your starting point of this year. Your red and orange is gonna continue to grow faster than $1 million is gonna put toward growing the green on this chart. So the pie chart tells the story of what really is occurring. So we still are, in the capital side, gonna be looking at asking for revenue on a regular basis from the cash reserve to spend $1 million instead of 600. So, but that's gonna be a choice, like Trustee Boatner had us challenged on how we spend those, road capital projects. And that's, most of our capital in this village is, of course, roads. There's very little other capital that's expended. And if we start stormwater as another item that we provide, it's gonna strain an already strained road program. Tim, is there anything I'm not saying?
No, said it well.
Good. All right. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to 8C. When the Plan Commission, a few years back, and the Zoning Board of Appeals combined into one committee, the terms were not staggered correctly, so we've been working on that. So I'm going to pull that from the agenda, and maybe we'll have it ready for everybody in 2 weeks when we meet again. So we'll move on to 8D, stormwater requests, Long Shadow Drive. Go
Before we
ahead.
do that,
Sure.
I did speak to Trustee Muncy about this. It goes to the mission statement, kind of and he's got a little presentation
Yep.
that he kind of provided me, and I said that'd be good for the whole board as a discussion item about capital and how we spend dollars and what our
Absolutely.
philosophy is going to be. It'll tie to the zoning commission and the work they're doing on trying to make the comp plan match.
Yep. Yep. So he's got a PowerPoint for us. Yep.
Thanks, Administrator Rooney. And yes, this is something that I had put together basically due to a conversation that we had been having about this issue, to provide, A, a little bit of background on the issue, but then also, B, at the end of it, a potential proposal to potentially address that. And the real question is, when we discuss this, what sort of position are we in? Are we really in a position to address these sort of issues? The first thing I want to go about is why does the village exist at all? Who are we? Are we like every other village, or do we have a separate and individual and special mission and vision? So if you look at, for example, the incorporation of Virgil and Lily Lake, that's not us, but it was incorporated, they were incorporated to stop a planned landfill, to basically to stave off something they didn't want to have happen. And after they did that, they realized there's a lot more value to this, so they were able to protect and began enacting ordinances and zoning to protect what they loved about their community. In Campton Hills, we incorporated to stop the imminent and ongoing threat of excessive development. That's really one of the main reasons why we were incorporated, so that we wouldn't be encroached upon, and Campton Hills wouldn't change. The character of it, the characteristics of it wouldn't change significantly. And after that, we also realized there's a lot to protect here. This is a very nice community. This is what we want to uphold. So we began enacting ordinances and zoning and those sorts of things. We also had a mission statement and a vision statement, which was painstakingly crafted. And I just want to highlight some of it that I think is important to our discussion here, is that we are committed to delivering municipal services in the most responsive, cost-effective, and efficient manner, and that we're honoring our rural heritage. In the vision statement, it states again, semi-rural, and maintain the semi-rural quality of our environment and its associated lifestyle. Well, that associated lifestyle has a lot to do with doing for yourself, being self-sufficient, and not relying so much on a large government. We want to control our own destiny, and we want to be fiscally viable, which we've been talking about a lot tonight. This equates to basically what's called the Jeffersonian model, where You want the government to be as close to you as possible. We don't want, with no disrespect to the county, they're wonderful people and they do a great job, but we don't want the county or the state telling us what to do. We want to be able to control our own destiny, and we want a government that is rigorously frugal and as simple as possible. So we're going to look at some of our other communities around us, including Geneva, Elburn, Lily Lake, St. Charles, and Batavia, which are all wonderful communities, all absolutely amazing places to live, but they're all very different, but they're different by design. So first of all, you look at the population of these different communities. Obviously, St. Charles with over 32,000 people dwarfs a Lily Lake or a Campton Hills when we're only a little over, or approaching maybe 11,000. But the populations are very different. We're definitely on the smaller end of that with Elburn and Lily Lake. You look at the budgeted expenditures in the past budget, or past or current budget of each of these municipalities. Obviously, there's a vast difference there as well. You're looking at over $220 million for St. Charles. Elburn's at $12.8 million. We're at $3.4. So there's a vast difference in these types, the money that's available to be spent by these communities. But if you look at the budget per capita, per person, not that it really works that way, but if you look at, how much are they spending per person, you look at St. Charles, Geneva, Batavia, yeah, they have over $6,000 per person to spend on things like sidewalks and stormwater and all sorts of things because they tax their residents. They have a property tax and they have a lot more income coming in. We have about $322 a person. We don't have a property tax. We don't have revenue coming in directly from our residents. Lily Lake has more income coming in than we do by far. So as a village, again, that Jeffersonian model, we are designed not to provide all kinds of services, but to provide the freedom for our residents to be able to choose what they want to do. Skip through two, sorry. So our residents, again, pay zero tax to our village, no property tax, yet in that period of time, we've been able to control our own destiny. You look around, that development, the open space, the zoning, we've been able to control that and do a pretty good job of keeping Campton Hills what we want to have kept, which has been awesome. We still have access to the exceptional resources of the Campton Township Highway District, who do an awesome job. The Township Highway District receives the same amount of funding they would have received if we didn't exist. Actually, to a minimal amount, Administrator Rooney showed that the MFT funding might even be a little bit more as estimated because the village exists. I would challenge that and say it's been a lot more because the village existed, because we keep adding more money from the locally government distributive fund, from the state that we get, that would not have been available if we did not exist. So, for example, the $400,000 or however many hundreds of thousands of dollars we're able to add each year to that road budget, that happens plainly only because we exist. Road maintenance remains a major funding issue for us. We've talked about it in a couple different areas tonight. We talked about it last. We will continue to talk about it. So it is still a big strain on our budget. And we also were able to develop an amazing police force that's a real valued, appreciated, and integral part of our community that was just a wonderful benefit of incorporating as a village. So all that was done with zero property tax levy for our residents. So our residents also still have choices, even though when we exist as a village, we don't have property tax, we still have the township open space and parks available to us. We still have the Kane County Forest Preserve District available to us. And you can choose to pay or not pay for the Park District resources from neighboring communities. You don't have to pay. It's not in your property taxes whether you never use them or not. If you want to use them, you can choose to pay. Libraries, we have the Elgin Community College available to us, and you can choose to pay or not pay for access to a neighboring community library. And it might seem like a lot if you ask them to do the calculation of how much is it to join the library. That's the same amount you would pay if you lived in that community. It would be on your tax bill instead of you just writing them a check. It's the same amounts. But for us, we can choose to do it or not. And then we have HOAs, POAs, and SSAs. So some residents have chosen to establish, and HOAs might get a bad name because they measure the height of your mailbox or whatever, but they also protect each other. They're able to say, hey, if we have an open space or a park, we're going to collectively fund that. Lake Campton is a good example of a property owners association. Mm-hmm. The Lake Campton Property Owners Association, members that live in that area pay $700 a year or thereabouts for some of them that live on the lake, and a little less if you live off the lake. They do that because they spend over $17,000 a year maintaining that lake, and they spend over $3,000 a year for insurance for that lake. It's a shared resource that they know they want to protect, and some HOAs, POAs, SSAs also include stormwater retention areas, runoff areas, those sorts of things. So we are not immune to the fact that there are stormwater problems. We are not insensitive to it, but we don't have that many resources. We really don't. We're not in a position to fund or address stormwater management projects across the board on private property. However, for people that have no assistance available to them through an HOA, POA, or anything else, what is one proposal is a stormwater management unassisted reimbursement fund. And what that is for is stormwater management issues where residents are unassisted by any other means, so there's no HOA, POA, SSA, no county resources, they have no other assistance. A reimbursement fund could be created by the village. This proposal has that reimbursement fund budgeted at $10,000 a year. Residents could apply for a reimbursement up to $5,000 per individual project, with a total reimbursement not to exceed 50% of the total project cost. So if your project costs $20,000, the reimbursement could be up to $5,000. If the project costs $4,000, the reimbursement could be up to $2,000. Stormwater management projects would have to affect multiple, so it has to be at least 2 or more separate property owners. And then if those funds from that fund were not utilized in a year, they would roll over into the next year. But if all the funds in one year were utilized, then there would be no funds left until the next budget year for a new $10,000 in that budget. The application process, would be fair, apparent, and transparent. So the standard application form would make sure that you qualify, or that a resident qualifies for all 5 aspects of this. If so, it then goes on to the Public Works Committee, who discuss it, review it, and determine whether or not they would recommend that to the board. And then the board makes the final determination with, obviously, there would be some type of appeal process after that. So it would be available to all residents, very apparent. You don't have to come directly to the board and plead your case individually. My point is here, I think we can all figure out a way to work together, because we are a unique village with a very minimalist government structure, and if we start expanding our vision, our mission, and our services, we're gonna have to start adding taxes to pay for these things. We realize we already have a roadway maintenance issue, which we're talking about how we're gonna get revenue for that. We can't continue to add other things onto it. We are listening to resident concerns. We sympathize. These are our neighbors. Some of us have the same issues happening on our properties, and we want to come up with ideas, and that's why I'm proposing this idea like this SMURF. We want to stay semi-rural and self-reliant, so let's work together to find the best solutions to try to keep living up to our mission and our vision. That's all I have on the topic.
Okay, Trustee Millette. Thank you, Ed.
All right, hand to God, Ed and I did not pre-plan this. Even though we talk a lot of different stuff. And I knew he was working on something. Smurf, no. But I know it's just a placeholder. But the point I want to bring up.
An engineer would never pick that acronym.
No, we don't like blue things, although we do like acronyms. It's the military in us. All right. The village of Downers Grove, a long-standing from the 1830s, incorporated that has a property tax levy, et cetera, has a program like this. The rationale behind it is there are problems that are too great for one neighbor to handle on their own, especially if it's a big puddle that 5 lots are sharing. The mission that the village council came up with was very similar. There's a certain pot of set-aside money for that purpose. You have the expertise of what staff there is, and then you had a process where it got reviewed by me when I was a stormwater administrator, and others to go and help, help multiply the private investment. The concept was for the private investment, and it's based on the fact that we, as the municipality in our county, just as in DuPage County, are the stormwater management or authority by the county ordinance. So we have a right to, but not a responsibility to. That's the way it's phrased. You're right to, but not a responsibility to. So I like this idea as a starter. And maybe we can squeak a little bit more, because we are not flush with cash, but we generally do, we do tend positive more than negative. Maybe 25,000 is a seed money to start with and see how that would go. I would suggest it as for a counter. And then, okay, if everybody else likes Smurf, I won't go to the wall on it.
And
Go ahead.
President, and
Sure.
Ray's here, so I'll say it, irrespective of him being present from the township. But the township, just as if it was a village and a more incorporated, robust, they cannot go on private property, and that's why this type of, you spoke to and that Ed was speaking to, would be necessary to create, because you have to have this public-private partnership, and it's really given a grant to the private group that is fixing a stormwater problem, because the village nor the township can go on private property per se and perform work without involving the lawyer with a lot of legal easement created and hold harmless, and you'd spend money on lawyers instead of fixing the problem. And that's why these kind of things get established that are still the homeowner group letting the contract to do the majority of the work and not the village. No offense to the lawyers.
All right, trustee Burson?
I appreciate the notion of setting up a sort of a grant program. It was an idea that has been bounced around by several people, I think, and I think it's a great idea. Like Trustee Millett, I question the amount of money. It sounds to me as if just some preliminary efforts on behalf of the residents in the Burning Tree area are going to exhaust the amount of money that would be available in any given year under this proposal. But I understand that we're not allowed to spend government money working on private property. Completely makes sense. However, I'm a little stuck on the idea that there are lots of these projects. When we think about the scope of the road challenge that we have, for instance, it's daunting. But when we start digging into these issues around the village, I think we're going to find that this is a really big problem, and $25,000 a year, and certainly not 10, but $25,000 a year isn't even going to make a dent in it. Am I suggesting that the village should pay for it? Of course not. We don't have the budget for that, and we don't have a mandate from the community for it, I don't think. But Trustee Millett and I discussed at the last meeting, during the break, I think, that we had for the cake after the swearing in, some other variations on this. And I'm wondering whether the village's money goes further when it comes to trying to actually clearly understand the problem and get good engineering work done. I think we also bounced around the idea of having the village facilitate the SSA process for residents that are interested in doing this. So the village might actually assist in the bonding process, as I understand it, right? So to me, I would like to see the village engage in things that are high value and that only the village can do as effectively as we can do them. And I feel like engineering might be one of those, and trying to help come up with creative financing solutions for fixing the actual problem seems like another one. The other thing I would mention is that in the case of the specific instance that was brought up to us, there are, in fact, legal questions sometimes that we might not want to talk about, but they're there. And so in the Burning Tree situation, as I understand it, we basically have two public ditches that are connected by infrastructure that is on private property. And so there are actual legal questions, not just money questions, but there's legal questions about that infrastructure, because has that become an easement by prescription over this time that it's been there? And so does it need to continue? Do we have a role in it whether we want to or not? There was a discussion last time as to the exposure of the resident, who I think has the opening to this system, right? If that resident were to decide that they just didn't want to support it anymore, they didn't want to have that water flow through their property, has there been, in fact, this easement by prescription, and is that resident potentially liable because they decide to effectively privately condemn this, this drainage system? Because the result, of course, would be more water puddling in the street. And so some of those types of questions might also be areas where the village could get involved, where for the residents to try and sort it out might be more difficult. I completely agree with Trustee Muncy that it's just not within the scope of the village's operations to the way that we're constructed, the way that we're funded, to pay for the actual remediation of most of these projects. But I do think that we have a role to play in helping make sure that residents confronted with these problems have resources for engineering, for bonding the project if it's large enough for that, and for working through legal issues that may be present.
Trustee Muncy, go ahead.
Anyone stepping in, anybody else if they were going to go? Okay. My only question to that is while I respect that we want to help all residents, I don't know that we have anybody within the village to help with engineering, to help with bonding, or to help with legal. Those are people we will pay. So unfortunately, we don't have those resources. We have the availability of them, but we will have to pay for them. And I don't know if they're going to cost us any less than they would cost the homeowners to do it themselves. So I don't want to overly complicate it. I would like to try to find some solution that we can try, which is why that was proposed. I am open to everybody's ideas, and I like the discussion. I just want to remind everybody that we don't have those people on staff. We're not that kind of village or city. So those resources would be something we would pay people directly as well.
And just one other historical footnote, we found 3 projects that, since 2007, that the village stepped in and assisted on this type of situation that Long Shadow is brought forth. And they range from 2,500 to 7,500 that the village contributed. I think it was a 25 and a 55 and a 75 that was expended to assist, like a grant that they're kind of asking for. And Mr. Dillon has worked with the 3 homeowners and then the ones that would, as you described it, a prescriptive easement that's existed before the village existed and before, and it wasn't on any county map either, that this stormwater kind of system that Mr. Tappendorf and Mr. Dillon have explained exists. It's probably not on anybody's plat of survey even. The developer of that many years ago put some system in to drain and didn't, as he said, the camera showed that they did the inversion on one of the pipes wrong, but it was working quite well until the culvert that goes from the village township ditch line into that private system collapsed. It was a galvanized culvert. It's not designed to last 35 years. And that system, so they're looking at, Jim Dillon has told me, between 20 and 25,000 to do a solution, and they're asking for whatever assistance the village could come up with. And I said we'd discuss it tonight, and the possibly next meeting, when he's got 2 estimates from 2 qualified contractors, we would give a consideration to what kind of dollar amount. I told him I could not ever see the village staff of any kind saying anything greater than 10,000, that it'd probably be closer to the 5, but any amount would help those residents try to band together to fix their, as it was described tonight. And they're looking at a solution of creating a swale where the water ponds currently to get to the back part of that property line that then could establish a new pipe system that would flow all the way out to Old Fox and then get across Burlington into the Whispering Willows water.
Gray Willows.
Great Willows.
Trustee Muncy?
Yeah. My only question, I guess, was to Administrator Rooney. Those 3 projects you mentioned, that was during a period of time where people still had access to Kane County stormwater resources, correct?
Yes.
And that's no longer available to us, correct?
Yes, that's true.
Trustee Burson, you?
Trustee Muncy correctly points out that we do not have on-staff engineering resources. And I note that, you know, we just voted to approve $191,000 worth of engineering. And I can't help wondering what kind of staff we could buy for $191,000. Now, it didn't seem, in the context of the project being discussed, that we're in a position to say, well, thank you very much, HR Green, for your services, but we're just going to take this on ourselves right now. It didn't seem like that really made a lot of sense. But as we look forward into the future, I'm not sure why we don't have an engineer. This is our single biggest budget item, and why we don't have someone on staff who is watching that and looking at all of these, all the options with both roads and then also stormwater. When we talk about roads, sometimes the question comes up, sometimes people say, well, you know, would it really be cheaper? Well, obviously, yes. And then sometimes people say, well, if we were to hire a full-time engineer, what would they do? I mean, they wouldn't really have anything to do all year long. Well, it can't be more expensive and for them to be underutilized at the same time, obviously. But not only that, when we stumble into the stormwater issue, it seems like if we had our own engineer, then they would be able to work with us on our road issues and also work with us on our stormwater issues. So when we think about whether we're in a position to offer that assistance to a resident who might need it with stormwater, it sounds to me like for less than $191,000 that we're going to spend on engineering these three projects, we would be able to employ a full-time engineer that would be able to work on roads and deal with stormwater.
Yeah, go ahead, Trustee Muncy.
On the surface, I could see where that sounds like it would make sense. And at some point, maybe a thorough analysis would prove that, yes, we would benefit from a full-time on-staff engineer. That could be possible. However, if what we were to ask, and I'm not going to do so, but if we were to ask HR Green how many people actually work on that, it's not just one. And if we were to ask how many engineering staff, village engineers, only have one person, no assistant, nothing else, you're not going to find that many. And if we were to ask the salary for a competent village engineer plus benefits and everything else full in, I don't think that the money we're talking about now supports that. So we're not there yet, I don't think, not even close. But what we do need to discuss is that potentially in the future, but right now, what's our solution now? And you know, what can we start trying going forward?
Trustee Morgan.
I think it's a very important issue that we need to look at now because of the upcoming budget. Even if it is $10,000 that we want to set aside for that type of funding, I think we need to get it done somehow before the 16th or the next meeting. To Trustee Millet's comment, I don't think $10,000 is enough. We always seem to, because of past boards and even this board, working to be fiscally responsible, I think we need to go back and look at what our overage is going to be for even this year and come up with a better number, and maybe the number is $25,000 that was thrown out. We're talking about one project here that, you know, their first estimate was $25,000. And it's something that all of a sudden just reared up now after 30 years. And to Administrator Rooney's point, since 2007, there's only been 3 instances that this has ever happened. That was paid, exactly. I understand because I lived through it. There's water problems all over the village. And no matter what you do, water is going to run, and we just need to somehow try to help any way we can. So to Trustee Muncy's point, I think it's a good idea. I'm not your acronym might be a little bit different, but let's go with SMRF.
Okay.
May I?
Oh, Nick, I'm sorry.
No, you're okay. Thank you. I did want to point out, because I have gone out and met with these folks and looked at this, and I just want to point out in this situation, something that I believe is unique versus a lot of the flooding and the standing water that we get around the village. You know, most homes around here are designed where some water is going to flow into a portion of their yard and it will stand there, and that's normal. And there's folks that have that worse than others. What these folks are dealing with, and I just want to make sure that we all like understand that this isn't them dealing with standing water in the backyard. This is a drainage system connecting one ditch through 10 different homes with a big concrete catch basin and a manhole cover going to another ditch. I can't help but think that it's the similarities outside of the going through private property. You know, in that same neighborhood, they have culverts going under the road, connecting one ditch to another ditch. If one of those failed and the water started building up in one of the ditches and it was flooding somebody's yard, we would be out there repairing the culvert going under the road. This was put in at a time when very little was documented. So we're making assumptions that this was the builder or a developer or, you know, someone who didn't know what they were doing put this in. We don't know any of that. I mean, we don't even have documentation on the roads and the road base. And I mean, what percentage of the village? We don't have documentation on a lot of things. But we're making this assumption that it was all done by private citizens. We don't really know. And I just feel like the fact is it's carrying water from a ditch to a ditch. It's not drain tiles on their yard that's pouring into the ditch and failing. It's just the ditch. It's water control. So I just want to make sure that, that we're not just hopping in and helping some folks with drain tiles on their yard.
I'm sorry, Trustee Millette?
Really good point. And I think maybe that's, if we do it this way, that's part of the evaluation criteria. You know, if your project affects more than 2 houses, that's one level of criteria. If your project is 1 or 2 houses plus it's carrying a crossroad culvert, you know, through your backyards that hits the Lake Campton or the ditch or something, I think that's a way to evaluate it. Because the ones we did in the past were for that reason. I mean, Nancy Lane was a quasi, it was the septic fields, but it was also some of the ditching along Nancy going out to Burlington was messed up. So that kind of, we felt that as a board at that time, that was a good justification for both of the things that happened at the other time. But the other 2 SSAs were similar to what Trustee Bodner's talking about, is it was something that was put in. The highway network, the road network relies on that to help drain its road base, so that's why we figured we had some skin in the game on that. And when we looked at the cost sharing part of that, that's kind of what we figured, okay, we think between us, the township, this is the right amount to contribute to the project. Is there a better formula? Maybe, but the inconsistency as to, you know, the properties that were developed in the 30s versus the ones that were developed in the 70s to the ones that are, you know, subdivision, you know, the ones that have storm sewers, which is an entirely different, you know, aspect. But to Trustee Muncie's proposal, they wouldn't be a participant in this type of program because they have an HOA that handles that aspect of their livelihood. So if we're looking at folks in this situation and we're looking at historically, we can see that the reason this is 100% true. The reason those pipes are there, whether the original builder installed it, a neighbor installed it, you know, because at some point the groundwater or the surface water went that way, and somebody wanted to put a house in the way of the surface water, and so they diverted around. That's land development 101. And you know, lots of times it seems simple. I'll put a swale in here or something without realizing, yeah, well, there's a sand seam of gravel there because it was an intermittent creek, so the water's still going to find that. Why does my sump pump go off all the time? Well, you didn't actually divert all the water, just the stuff you could see. And if it was something that we know about, is something that we had an inkling on, you know, if there is a plan from the 1970 subdivision, then we can maybe help residents by saying, okay, we found this. We don't have it necessarily, but we have ways to help the county find them or something along those lines. It's another way we can contribute, whether we have a full-time person that's an engineer, doesn't have to be for that type of thing, because you're looking at records research type of assistance, because some folks, whoa, I have to go to the county and find stuff. Well, we can help you do that faster. So maybe there's another aspect in this where we determine on that evaluation criteria for these projects, these are some of the things we could consider, to give you points, because it ends up being a point system. You get 4 points if you have, or whatever the case may be, because how else do you, objectively look at something, look at all that, and then see where the points, if it makes sense that, wow, I didn't think that one was worse than that one type of thing, then you can revisit on how your evaluation criteria goes.
So you're saying that the Public Works Subcommittee that would take the SMRF program would kind of resemble a scoring system that Kane County, and easier than that, but it make it so it wouldn't be politically derived by the 7 of you. There would be, a very much kind of an engineering solution to come up with which projects got funded and at what percentage. So it didn't become who told a good story and it was emotionally heartfelt at the dais. Because most people that sit at any public dais want to help their neighbors. So you have a predisposition to want to help. But we need some kind of formula, especially with Campton Hill's limited budget. So I think building off what Downers Grove and some other municipalities have done and what Ed is proposing is a good starting point. And it'd be good to spend the money on moving dirt or putting a pipe in instead of engineering professional fees or, and that, because working with Ray and the township and looking at this system, it's not on, we asked the homeowners there, is it, this pipe, is it on anybody's plat of survey? And nobody's raised their hand, and the research the township did at the county, it's not, it's really just not there. So there's probably people that had that pipe, water draining through it for the last 30 years, but didn't even know the pipe was under their property coming from Long Shadow to get out to Old La Fox. So it's not like anybody's done anything wrong or the village didn't exist. It wasn't even an inkling of going to exist when this pipe was created.
Yeah, go ahead, Trustee Muncy.
To Trustee Morgan's points, it's budget time. So I would suggest maybe this is the way to do it. If we could get a staff recommendation at our next meeting for the amount, and maybe you can poll the trustees separately, staff recommendation for a budget amount for stormwater reimbursement program. And then we can hash out the details of maybe modeling it after Downers Grove or somebody else or a point system, because that's not going to happen in a week or 2 weeks. But we do want it to happen quickly, because we do have people who are suffering and are going to look to see if they can qualify for some type of relief here.
Good idea. All right, I think we need to move on. Everybody's done with their comments, and good. Okay, we'll move on to 9 additional items from president, trustees, or attorney.
I have one.
Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
We talked very, very briefly about this. I believe we didn't actually talk about it. It was introduced by Administrator Rooney, but there are several potential new revenue sources, ideas that are being floated around, research looked into. I would ask staff to please start preparing those. We'd like to hear what the potential revenue impact would be of those, how it's worked in other communities, just a brief presentation of other potential revenue sources to help us with our road fund and just our overall general budget, please.
Okay, thank you, Ed. And I just want to remind all elected officials here to, don't forget to fill out your statement of economic interest. Oh, you should have it online. Yeah, look for it, you should have it. Okay, and I think that's it,
I
and.
think Trustee Burton had a comment, right?
Yeah, all right, motion to adjourn.
So moved, Muncy.
Moved by Muncy.
Second.
Second by Morgan, and all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.